Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Inventive Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Gaurav Nemade. I'm the co-founder of Inventive AI. And today I'm really excited to talk to Mike Kunkle. He's a seasoned expert in sales and is currently the vice president of sales at SPARXiQ. With over 30 years of experience in the field, he has dedicated his career to improving sales results for various organizations. He has also authored a book titled The Building Blocks of Sales Enablement, and his insights have been recognized across multiple platforms, establishing him as a thought leader in sales training and enablement. Mike, excited to be talking to you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. I'm happy to be here. And that introduction was just like my mother wrote it.
Awesome. Mike, let's jump in with a quick overview question about your journey from founding your consultancy, transforming sales results, to becoming VP at SPARXiQ. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Let me know if that's how the company name is pronounced. And how's your philosophy on sales effectiveness evolved over the years as you've transitioned through various roles?
Sure, yes. Yeah, it is SPARXiQ.
SPARXiQ,
And
okay.
I'm the VP of Sales Effectiveness Services there. You know, it was interesting. The concept of sales performance improvement for me started back in the 1990s. And I, started in sales training, did sales effectiveness work eventually. Didn't become the term sales enablement didn't emerge until much later. But I was always looking for ways to improve organizational and Salesforce performance. And so eventually, it was, I think, 2003, I created the first version of what I call the building blocks of sales enablement today. And once that formed, and I had all of those different elements in the blocks and used those as performance levers to try to create an environment and support and training and coaching and management that would help sales forces get the best possible results. And I created the systems that I work with: sales training, sales hiring, sales readiness, sales coaching, sales management. At that point, from 2003 to probably 2015, there were minor evolutions. There was the addition of a block here or there, but it remained relatively stable. And I would say that that's the same even to today, 10 years later in 2025, because the building blocks were really not enablement back in that day. They were just elements of sales effectiveness, of how do you get the best possible performance out of a sales force. And if you think about those elements, understanding your buyer and your market, having the right content, buyer engagement content, sales support content, training, coaching, all of these elements, those elements are the same today. Now, we do them somewhat differently. We have great tools like AI. We've gotten smarter about how we create content and align it to buyer personas and answer the questions that they have. We've gotten smarter over the years, and we have newer and better tools. But all of those performance levers are still pretty much the same ones. So it's been relatively stable. Now, one of the differences today, I would say, is the emergence of the term, at least, revenue enablement. And then sales operations has sort of evolved to revenue operations, and looking at go-to-market and, across the entire customer life cycle, from before the customer knows who we are, to prospecting them and creating awareness and interest, to managing the opportunity, to a win, acquiring the customer, and then managing and growing that relationship. And I think that we're going to see revenue operations and revenue enablement start to merge and really become one thing. And that has really been the crux of my building blocks of sales enablement for years. Whoever does it, whatever needs to be done, these are all of the elements that are required to get a sales force operating at its highest and best potential. And it doesn't matter what name we call them, sales enablement, revenue enablement, operations, sales ops, rev ops. Those are all the things that need to get in place and be firing on all cylinders. And when that happens, you have a sales force that's operating best in class. So I think the terms have evolved, the tools have evolved, but it's still the same things that you need to get in place to make a sales force as successful as possible.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting to see, like, you've been longer in the industry in terms of seeing that evolution when the term sales enablement was also not in the horizon. Super exciting. You touched upon this slightly, Mike, but I would love to dive deeper into this. Like, what does it take to build a strong sales enablement program? Like, what would you say are the top 3 to 5 things according to you?
Yeah, so I'm doing a webinar later this month on how to put together a sales enablement program that makes an impact. And I can share some of the key concepts from that. I think the first thing is you have to decide internally how you and your company and your leaders are going to define sales enablement, revenue enablement, whatever term you use, and what it's going to mean to your company, because there are so many flavors of enablement. And I don't think that we need to get to one definition, because if you look at organizations, what a startup needs, what an SMB needs, what a small enterprise needs, and what a large enterprise needs, and where they are on their company maturity level are all different. And so I think the first thing is to define, what does our sales force need? What does our company need based on where we are today? And who are the players internally, the cross-functional collaborators that are stakeholders to the performance of the sales force and the company? And then let's get them together to get aligned on this definition and how we're going to support the sales force and get a charter put in place. That'd be one. Two would be doing what I call a situation assessment on the sales force. It's almost exactly like a salesperson doing discovery with a client. What's the current state of the sales force? What are the challenges they face, the opportunities got, and the impacts of not addressing those challenges or opportunities and staying in the status quo? Then you look to the desired future state. What are the outcomes, the best possible outcomes and the goals and desires of the executive team and the senior sales leader for the sales force? And what are the priority of those outcomes and objectives? Then you can do a needs analysis by looking at the current state and the desired future state and think about what would be required to make the leap from point A to point B. Those would be the needs. And then you can do an impact analysis. Well, if we get there, if we can get to that desired future state, what would it mean? Right? How would we reduce the risks and the negative impacts of the current state? And what would that mean financially and operationally and to sales productivity and whatever the metrics are that matter for that company, velocity, whatever it is. Then you've got the needs analysis and the impact analysis, and you know what your sales force needs. Then you can do a gap analysis of the building blocks. You look down at all of the 15 blocks and you say, okay, which of these are critical to help the sales force get where they want to go based on that analysis that I just did? Which are in place? Which are what I call GEFN, G-E-F-N, good enough for now? What's good enough for now? What doesn't need me to mess around with it? What's missing that I need to get in place stronger or better? What do I not need to worry about? And then you look at those blocks and basically you've prioritized what blocks are critical. Now, if you're bringing your cross-functional collaborators with you along this journey, the people who own some of those blocks, because it's not always all sales enablement, the people that own those blocks can be weighing in. You can be building a guiding coalition. You can be getting buy-in, right? And you can be figuring out who's going to own what, who's going to do what, and who's going to support whom as you're going through this journey. Then you can really take a look at all of this and say, okay, what plan do I need to build to put the right blocks in place to support the sales force in getting from point A to point B? And I do something called a force field analysis. I think about what are all the things that are in my favor that are pushing me forward. And this is from a guy named Kurt Lewin in the 1940s. He was a social psychologist, but this is a really cool technique. And I write down all of these things that he called driving forces, things that are moving me forward toward my desired future state. And then what are the restraining forces, the things that are holding me back? And those could be things that I don't know yet, right? Because anything you don't know or don't have in place is a restraining force. Or they could be things like maybe one of the cross-functional collaborators isn't fully bought in, or maybe we don't have a deep enough buyer acumen to know how to craft problem statements that would attract buyers to us. Whatever it might be, what's holding us back from getting to where we want to go? Then you can ask two simple questions. What can I do to reduce or eliminate those restraining forces? And what can I do to add or strengthen the driving forces? And then you just turn that into an action plan. These are the steps that I need to take to reduce or eliminate what's holding us back. Here are the other steps I need to take to put the right things in place. And then all of this has this strategic thread running through it, tying it back to what the sales force needs in that situation assessment that we did at the beginning. And again, if you're bringing your cross-functional collaborators along with that journey, when you're done, you have a cross-functional, organization-wide sales enablement plan, and the people who are responsible for implementing their piece of it know what that plan is, have been part of building it, and now you can all go execute and measure and track results and shift and adjust as needed. But that's how you build a strategic enablement plan that will allow you to have an impact, a positive impact on your sales force and your company results.
Got it. Yeah, that's very thorough in a sense, like start by deep diving on what your company basically wants, what the problems might be. What was the framework you talked about? Was it called the force field analysis?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting to hear like how different forces play into picture and then, like use that to kind of come up with a plan. And stakeholder collaboration, of course, is like super critical in larger organizations because nothing happens without that. What are the most common pitfalls that you have faced when implementing sales training programs? And if there is an example that you can share with us, that will be great without getting into the names of the organizations, of course.
Well, this will probably make me somewhat unpopular, Gaurav, but it's the truth. I often joke that one of the banes of my existence, one of the most challenging things I've had to face, is to get the people who are responsible for growing revenue to actually do the things that will grow revenue. All right. So very often our senior sales leaders sort of get in their own way because. And, I get this, right? You look at the profile of a senior sales leader. These are go-getters. These are type A personalities. These are drivers who want to go knock down walls and get things done and rally the troops, right? Because that's what it takes to get to the top and make things happen. But you know what those people typically aren't are the geeky analytics, right? Who like to take apart things and put them back together and figure out how to make them work. So, one of the challenges I faced in the beginning was trying to explain the details of what I was doing to the senior sales leader who wanted to hear 3 bullet points, right? And here I come like with, 50 slides and all this information and everything about the building blocks. And I would either put them to sleep or their eyes would roll up into the back of their head. And so I had to learn how to communicate differently to different people who weren't wired the same way as me. Now, the other challenge is sometimes that these senior sales leaders, because they're problem solvers and they're jumping on things, sometimes that creates the phenomenon that I call the master of disaster. And I did face this in one organization where I would go through that process I just described. I would create a strategic enablement plan that would move us from point A to point B. I'd begin implementing that plan. And the master of disaster is a senior executive who overreacts to the last thing that went wrong. And so, you could almost see their knee bouncing into their forehead, right? And they'd be all upset about this thing that happened. And then everybody would have to drop everything to tackle this particular issue. Sometimes when it was a one-off, sometimes when it wasn't really that serious, but you couldn't say no practically to this senior executive. And so plans would shift and we'd be going a different direction. And 3 weeks later, guess what? Something else would go wrong. And then, holy cow, there'd be a big shift in that direction and things would change. And when you're in that situation, it was 18 months later, I left that organization in frustration because there was no way that I was going to be able to make the impact that I wanted to make in that environment. And so that's one of the things I learned from that experience was you really have to be careful where you pick. And even when you do that, that people at the top change, right? And people leave and people come in. So you're never going to avoid that completely. And truthfully, it's rarely as bad as the experience that I had in that one company, right? I've worked at a lot of other companies as either an employee or a consultant. That was the worst case scenario, right? But, when you get to working with a master of disaster, it's never fun, and you've got to figure out how are you going to survive, thrive, and make an impact in that environment. I think that's the tough one. The other one is that, if you truly want to make, measure, and prove an impact, you have to get the people who are going to be judging your impact and your ROI analysis or your measurement plan. You've got to get them involved up front to agree on how you're going to measure, how you're going to report, how you're going to do attribution, so that later when you present your data, they're not steamrolling you and poking holes in it because they agreed on how you're going to do it up front. And I joke sometimes that all evaluation is a lie, but you have to get together with people and agree on the lies that you're going to believe, right? And if you do that up front, that's hyperbole, and I don't really think it's all a lie, but attribution is very difficult, and it's rarely perfect. We don't work in a science lab. We work in a sales organization that's moving at 100 miles an hour and can't always do a real scientific analysis of things. So you look for evidence of impact, and you look for something that's compellingly realistic, right, as opposed to having to prove everything, and you get agreement up front on how you will measure, report, and attribute. And then when you report your results later, it's going to be much more successful and accepted by the people that you're reporting to. So those are some of the pitfalls and things that where I've skinned my knee or bumped my nose over the years that I now try to share with other people so they don't make the same mistakes that I did.
Nice. Okay. So just to summarize, I think so 3 points that you mentioned. The first one was like sometimes leaders just get in their own way of, helping you make the right change in the organization. The second one I really love, which is master of disaster, which is like drop everything. This is the focus and this is what you need to do. And I think the third is just getting alignment up front is much more easier when you're driving a change in the organization. Makes a lot of sense. I want to maybe jump into talking about something I'm really excited about, which is your book, The Building Blocks of Sales Enablement. I know you have touched upon a bunch of the concepts that you touch like in the book itself, but if there was like one thing that you would advise to the sales leaders who are listening to this podcast from that whole book, and I'm sure you've had like multiple conversations after that book was released, what would that be? Like one advice that you have for sales leaders based on your all research on the book?
Okay, so one of the things is that there is no silver bullet or magic fairy dust answer to sales performance. is always a system. It's always a combination of things. And very often I see people looking for that one thing, that silver bullet, and they get so focused on that they forget the other moving parts of the system that have to align. So systems thinking is not very prevalent sometimes in our sales profession, but it's the systems that I've seen developed and put into place that are the things that create repeatable, replicable, consistent, predictable results and scalable results. And so I would caution sales leaders to not get too myopic on one thing, but to think about what are all of the things I have to get into alignment, and how can I create a repeatable, replicable system that when followed is going to get me consistent results. That's probably one of the biggest ones. The other one that I find really puzzling is that we seem to have a prevalent thought that salespeople can just get out there and sell any which way that they want. I call it a free-for-all. And there are at least 5 studies, the favorite of which of mine is from CSO Insights, even though it's a few years ago now. But they showed that when organizations had a formal sales process and a formal methodology and had high degrees of adoption of both of them, I think it was 75% was the point at which there was a real statistical break in results. They got far higher results when they had a formal process and methodology adopted. I think it was 75%, and the next was 90%. But it was better revenue plan attainment, it was better individual rep quota attainment, and it was far higher win rates. And yet, I see organizations out there that they're not making any effort to adopt a formal single methodology, a formal process, get those in place, and get adoption so that the reps are selling using this methodology. And that puzzles me to no end because, I mentioned the CSO Insights results, but there were at least 4 or 5, 6 maybe different studies all showing the same thing. And yet, as senior sales leaders, we very often are allowing a free-for-all as opposed to getting the discipline and focus in place. The last one of those, I would say, is the impact of great coaching and creating a coaching culture is significant. And organizations that do it and put into place what's referred to as dynamic coaching, meaning rather than just opportunistically coaching, whatever they happen to see, get into a cycle of purposely diagnosing what an individual rep needs and providing them the field training or coaching or support to improve that one thing. And then when they're done with that, you move on to diagnosing the next thing. And so you get into a cycle with your entire sales team of almost that concept of that book, The 1% Difference. If you do a 1% improvement every month with everybody on your team over the course of a year, it's like investing. It's like compound interest. At the end of the year, you have far higher results. Yet I'm not seeing that kind of commitment to ongoing developmental coaching. If I see coaching at all, it's very often a manager firing off quick feedback. It isn't coaching, it's feedback, right? I see them telling the reps what to do rather than engaging the rep, right? And making sure that if the rep doesn't know what, why, and how to do something, well, then you can train them. But if they know what, why, and how and just need to do it better, then you need to engage them and coach them and pull them along and pull it out of them. And that's something that is not pervasive in the sales profession today, but the organizations that do that and get top-down support for it and get into a cadence of continuous improvement, they're far outperforming the organizations who are not doing coaching like that. So those are the things that I would hope that senior sales leaders and CEOs would take away from something like the book, The Building Blocks of Sales Enablement.
Yeah, these are really fascinating. And I was just like, as you were speaking, thinking about how, some of the mistakes we are doing in my company, Inventive. But just to summarize, I think really great points. The first one is systems thinking. Like there is no silver bullet. Like you have to have multiple pieces work together to kind of build something that is successful. The second one you mentioned was around discipline and focus. So figure out what works and make sure that 75, 80, 90% of the organization kind of follows that approach that is like proven. And I guess the third one is coaching, right? Like 1% better mentality and the compounding interest will show up in due course. Really, really great points, Mike. Awesome. Next, I want to jump into the hottest topic of the current world, which is AI. I want to understand, like, how are you seeing, what's your take on like the state of technology and AI in sales at this point, and what are you most excited about?
Well, first of all, I am excited about it, and I do think it offers tremendous potential. I think there's a Bill Gates quote that says something like, we always overestimate the short-term impact of technology and underestimate the long-term impact, right? And so right now, I still think there's a tremendous amount of hype around AI, and everybody and their brother is talking about how they've got AI in their product when what they've got maybe is an algorithm, right? But I think what we're seeing with generative AI and the advancements that's making, there are ways to fill in holes in content plans. There are ways to use AI to do research on companies and buyer personas. There are companies doing AI role plays in coaching. We have a product with AI at SPARXiQ for wholesale distributors that does guided selling. So it looks at a massive territory and I don't know if you're familiar with much in wholesale distribution, but they have tens of thousands of SKUs and products generally that they distribute, that they sell to their customers. And so in a territory, it's very difficult for a human to look at that, wade through all of the data, right, and make some kind of insightful decision. AI can go in there and chew up that data and come back and say, hey, you have customer A who's very much like customer B, but customer A is buying almost your entire market basket of products, and customer B is not. You have an opportunity to go work with customer B and get them buying more of your products just like customer A. So it can look at this massive territory and all of this data and spit out these guided selling recommendations. I think that is an absolutely phenomenal use of AI, is to provide that kind of analysis that would take a human so long, right, culling through spreadsheets or trying to use a BI tool, right, when, you can feed it into AI and, it tells you pretty much, here's your upsell opportunity, here's your cross-sell opportunity. Hey, this customer has been slowing down. They're defecting slowly. Let's go get them back on track. That's a really cool use to me. So, and then I think anytime, Gaurav, you can have technology doing the mundane, repetitive, administrative tasks to give your sales force more time back to actually be engaging with buyers and increase their time spent selling, that's going to be critical. The problems I see with AI today is, and I'm even personally the recipient of absolutely horrible automated approaches of people trying to sell things to me that I don't even buy. I'm not even their ICP. They're just throwing this stuff basically like spaghetti at a wall to see what will stick. And so I see a lot of really bad automation with AI today. And I'm sure that as it works through the hype cycle and companies really start to figure out what's the most effective way. And I think that's the other thing. And this is general advice, I suppose, but I believe it applies to how AI is being used. We tend sometimes to strive for efficiency before we actually have figured out effectiveness. And as a friend of mine says, that just leads to you doing a lot more dumb things faster, right? If you've got to get to effectiveness first, figure out the most effective way to get a result, and then see, how can I do that more effectively? How can we do more of that? Is there a way that we can automate pieces of that, right? So that you can do smarter, more effective things faster or more of them. And I think when we figure out some of those loops, AI is going to have a huge, huge impact in the sales profession.
I really love that line, effectiveness over efficiency. Some of this is like illuminating bulbs in my head, like, oh, and I should be thinking on those principles. Very insightful, Mike. Thanks a lot. If you were to pick one like biggest opportunity of AI in sales enablement, what would that be?
Well, knowing the impact that practice has, right, and knowing that for whatever reason is, as much as we use sports analogies in our profession, and sports and Olympians and dancers and musicians, right, all practice so hard to become masters at their craft. And we in sales don't tend to do that. We come up with reasons why, role play is fake, or, hey, that feels awkward, right? And we don't practice. I think the concept of being able to practice your skills with AI in a safe environment where you're not messing up in front of customers, where you're getting feedback and you have a chance to do it again. I think that's probably one of the coolest uses of AI, right, if we can get people doing it.
Awesome.
So that's it for me.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Role playing for sure. I think like anything from customer calls to like discovery to I've been on the other side, like somebody is trying to sell me and I was going like, dude, like go practice your pitch before you are kind of sharing it with me, right? Like some of the junior salespeople. So yeah, I can totally see how that will add a lot of impact in the enablement space. Jumping to our next section, like I wanted to just get some tips and advice from you for myself, for sales leaders generally. You have a massive LinkedIn following. You have like north of 200,000 followers. I'm just curious, what advice would you have for people who are trying to, one, build a following and also using it strategically to drive business in their organizations?
Well, I think, I've said for years that content is a magnet. And if you publish things that people find helpful, if you publish things that cut through the noise, I think it will attract people who are interested in those same things to you. And I started years ago before, LinkedIn had probably algorithms even, right? And I was sharing my content, but I was also sharing a lot of other content from other sales experts. And people thanked me probably once or twice a week. I'd get thank yous for sharing this or sharing that, and, sharing the kind of content that I shared. And I built a lot of my following doing that. And today I'm trying to do the same thing. But the algorithms actually kind of work against that sometimes, because the stuff that's rewarded, I look at some of these posts that people are doing, and it's like almost like buyer beware, right? I see some recommendations. I see people with 2 years of sales trying to tell other people how to be successful. And so I think if you can find a way to encapsulate content that is truly proven effective, not something that worked once in one company or in one situation, then you can share that with people. If you can share other people's ideas and concepts and make sure they get credit for it. If you maybe a newsletter. I started my newsletter I think I've done 80 weeks, 80 different newsletters, and I skipped some weeks. So it's probably been, maybe around for 100 weeks or so, a little over 2 years. And I've got something like close to 40,000 subscribers, not massive, but more than I expected have jumped into, read it on LinkedIn and get an email about it each week. And so I think it's because of the content that I've shared. I think it's because I've been able to show people that it works and offer proof of the impact that it makes, and I probably hurt myself a bit by not playing the algorithm game, right? Doing some of the, the things that people do to get more attention. But in the long run, I think my strategy is going to yield better results by trying to share content of value that helps people. So that would be my advice. I'm not sure it's what everybody is doing today, but
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
it's worked for me at least.
Got it. Okay. Content of value makes sense. What's the best piece of advice that you have got in your career?
Well, I think I would probably be it's not about you, it's about them. I had a mentor tell me that years ago. And if you're selling, it applies to you. It's not about you, it's about your buyers. If you're managing a team, it's not about you, it's about your team. It's this other centric way of looking at life and an other centric mindset towards success that you will get what you want out of life by helping enough other people get what they want. And that's a quote I heard, boy, I bet 40 years ago from Zig Ziglar, and has stuck with me for my entire career, right? Help others be successful and you'll be successful.
Got it. Okay. What's a myth you wish would disappear forever in the sales space?
That product pitching is effective selling, right? I would love to see the word pitch erased from the sales profession. If companies want to pitch to Shark Tank, knock yourself out, but stop pitching to customers, right? Problem-centric selling, buyer-centric selling, so much more effective than pitching products and companies. So I wish that I wish.
Very interesting. Okay. And maybe one of the last questions from my side, like the space you outlined, the evolution of the space for last like few decades essentially. But things kind of change in terms of technology and approaches and stuff like that. Like, what's your go-to method for staying ahead in the industry in terms of keeping up with everything in sales enablement?
I do a ton of research, a lot of it obviously on the internet. I read a lot. I used to read 50 books a year. Now I probably read a lot more book summaries and, articles, but a lot of reading. And I try to talk with somebody once a week who is in some form of Salesforce performance improvement, very often another enabler, but someone who is doing strategic enablement and making an impact. And so, sharing ideas with, other impact players and strategic enablers, and then reading and internet research are how I try to keep up.
Awesome. I really like that one of talking to one new person or one person who is into the strategic area. I think I'm going to steal that one, Mike. Awesome. Mike, anything else you wanted to share, talk about? The floor is yours before we close.
I know I really appreciate being here. This stuff. I do have a webinar on smmconnect.com coming up on the 23rd. That process that we talked through about how do you build an enablement plan that's strategic and makes an impact. That'll be there. And anybody who wants to reach me, you can check out modernsalesfoundations.com, which is our training website, or SPARXiQ, SPARXiQ.com. Or catch me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll be sure to link the URLs in the show notes as well, Mike, once the episode goes out. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. It was great chatting with you. A lot of great insights.
All right. Thank you, Gaurav.
Thanks.
Appreciate being here.